Immigration, a very polarizing topic in the United States, but the polarization is not the focus of this video. The video will focus on the public policy implementations of an evolving immigration system. While it may exclude at other times and open its arms at other times, the system has existed since the creation of naturalization within the colonies. Through the 5 lenses, the very units that our government class has focused on for the past several months, I will break immigration down. So without further ado, let us get right into our first unit, with the Constitution. While the Constitution itself doesn't dedicate a lot of time to the idea of immigration, and that's due because of the qualifications of what was considered an immigrant were a lot different now than they are in the 1700s. Mentioning the differences and asking, hey, what are those differences? Leads me to the precedent document of the Constitution, that being the Articles of Confederation. While the Articles failed in many ways, one thing it did make clear was the American policy regarding the qualifications of an immigrant and the recognition of the process called naturalization, given the power to that decision to the states, which I see as another fatal flaw. Another of the compromises needed to pass some type of loose binding between these states into what at the time was called a union. That is not, however, the policy of choice for this unit. If one were to look at the wording of the Constitution, more specifically analyzing Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, you would see a clear change from states, as found in the Articles of Confederation, to the federal government in the Constitution. And that, folks, is the focus of the Immigration Unit 1. The change in the wording between these two founding documents. From the wording change, a lot is established. A clear line in the sand by Federalists regarding the bare minimum of their authority. 2. A large compromise from the opposition, found mainly from Thomas Jefferson and his supporting factions, fearing the power of the federal government. This compromise shows the mutual understanding of some need for a centralized government with the authority over matters of the state, seeing as the document that gave way to the Constitution failed in many, many ways and ended in rebellion and misunderstanding. So observing the back and forth nature of the debate over this topic and where to put the authority transitions me to the state and federal level and the wording. One can easily call it traditional democratic approach, the Founding Fathers looking out for our best interest as the basic governing body of our states. But according to the UChicago, the Fathers' Constitution article regarding the matter, upon closer inspection, it shows many pluralistic characteristics. Different factions competing for their own idyllic beliefs in what they believe at the time to be the right thing for the country. If I were to look at it, I'd say a little more traditional democratic, due to the fact that they believed they were laying the groundwork for this country, and therefore they set accordingly. But that's just one thing to think about as we transition to our second unit, political beliefs and behaviors. So, focusing on political culture by ideological beliefs and behaviors would be analyzed best through a policy that really got through popular belief as well as legislative belief. While in the 1920s they were a very prosperous time for the United States of America, we also saw a large influx of immigrants from South Asia, General Asia area, East and Southern Europe. Through this influx, a lot of resentment for minority groups started, especially from those areas, and several events like the Red Scare of 1919, the uncertainty of World War I, and the massive general undertaking of jobs by these immigrants as they're coming into the countries didn't really help it. And xenophobia really got its rise here. Alright, so as I was saying, xenophobia really saw its rise here, and by the mid-1920s, anti-foreigner groups such as the KKK saw massive membership spikes, with the KKK rising to over 2 million members by 1925, according to the American Experience of the PBS website. These weren't the overzealous anti-anything groups that we think they are synonymous for today, but average American citizens who joined because they feared that their way of life was being confronted and endangered by the presence of other groups in the country. So this rise in fear and eventual hatred and increase in immigration over time really set the stage for the Immigration Act of 1924, the policy that I chose for Unit 2, and also called the National Origins Act. Really focused on stemming the communist flood from Eastern and Southern Europe, as well as halting all massive influence of Asian perspective in the country at that time, and effectively placing a very small quota of allowance by the current recorded number of people in that country by ethnicity through census data at the time, except in the case of the Asian exclusion zone, which was barred completely from entry if you were from that area or at that area at the time of moving here. According to the Office of Historians website, the 1924 Exclusion Act was the first recorded widely restricted immigration act in the United States, so that's pretty cool. So, displaying wholeheartedly the fear in every American's heart regarding the loss of wealth and the spread of evil communism, as well as playing off the uncertainty of outcome in World War I. Really, even though there wasn't any uncertainty and defeat once the Americans came storming in there at the end and everything kind of went clear. But anyway, the act reflects the popular opinion of the states at that time, and I think that was key to this unit of how the public opinion influences policy in such a big way, rather than just them doing whatever they want to do in the legislature. So a scared mob is obviously, in some cases, an angry mob, and an angry mob is something Congress has not had a history of dealing well with, therefore they will do anything to stop that. And so, therefore, this act, and its general application of Dikembe Mutombo-style immigration access into the country, fits the need to calm the masses at the time, at the risk of opportunities for a greater and more populous nation with the immigrant population coming in. But, nah. The way I see it, the act was obviously a toss-up. Either way, either the risk the dissolution of a nation that would likely result to violence against the groups that they perceive their way of life as threatening, or, hold the union together by proving the government mirrors the needs of its people and sign this bill. It really shows that at this time, immigration became a very complex issue on every level, no matter what dynamic you look at it or what scope you put it under. And that brings me to Unit 3. Unit 3 analyzed the political parties, action groups, and mass media in connection with elections. Therefore, a policy to represent this unit effectively would ideally incorporate these factors into a period of time close to or during a high-ranking election, say a president. One such policy that does just this is the focus policy for my project right here, is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The bill itself, while clean-cut in civil rights provisions, effectively outlawing the discrimination on any terms based on the differences one holds to another, aimed at ending the unequal application of voting registration regulations and to minorities and groups like that. But it also had a very unique legislative process for the time, and up until that point and well beyond, the bill was by far the most debated and hard-fought civil rights bill to enter the floor in the Senate and the House. The political parties at the time of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were a bit different than we think of them now, and that's just to say the least. In fact, it was almost like a role reversal. More Republicans supported the bill signing into law than Democrats. I know that seems a bit odd, how we see Democrats as the more liberal ones and the more open to an fully integrated culture where these racial barriers and every other difference barrier is broken down in the thought of the past. But in fact, the Democrats of 1964, for the majority, voted against these types of bills of racial integration because they saw that as expensive and unnecessary, while the Republicans, sticking to their roots in some aspects, voted wholeheartedly for the bills to pass as long as they didn't interfere with the rights of the states or call the states unduly into action that they didn't need to do or cost them too much. The key thing to look at here is that the tools to motivate the bill didn't really lie directly in the legislators, or that it ended up there. It started with the people, the voters. And so, if you think about it, the people elect the representatives, and if the people speak, the risk of election is there, therefore the representative will act. In the address to the American people regarding this bill, JFK used very specific language and made it quite clear that the mass media will be his message to Congress on passing the bill, as opposed to dealing with the rather stubborn Democratic Party at the time, and who he pretty much had to fight his own party to get a bill passed. So I guess that shows how the executive really doesn't have a party when he comes in the office, because he must rule for either side. So let's look at the video and check the wording that JFK uses and really analyze the loaded language and look for key terms. Great video. He was always known as the great speaker, and you can hear a couple words in there and a couple phrases that really identify with his great speaking and his liberal identity. Fighting tyranny, a great responsibility, and a proud descendant of 40 million immigrants. And we are a nation of immigrants. You might have heard that before. It's such powerful words, you hear him and say, hey, whatever that guy has to say, I'm with him. And after his tragic death in 1963, those words kind of became legend, repeating endlessly throughout time to the tune of civil rights advocacy in any case. These words sparked action within the people, and from that point you see the legislative support on both sides take a turn to go toward that direction of passing the bill, almost in his honor. It's also most likely, from the people translating to the representatives of the House as they see their executive die, it's a rather powerful symbol to the people more than the legislators. But take all the good aspects of that, and the mass media support for the bill, JFK's famous words, as well as his tragic death for civil rights, as we call it, and the bill's eventual passing, combine them all together, and you get Lyndon B. Johnson's 1964 race for a presidential election. LBJ is the president for JFK, and president after his assassination ran for a re-election pretty much off of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Sourcing JFK's legacy, his words, the bill as vice president that he supported wholeheartedly, he won in a literal landslide. 61% of the popular vote and 486 out of the electoral votes, compared to Goldwater's 52. Goldwater being the representative, the Republican candidate, for election at that time. I almost feel bad for Goldwater, seeing as he had to go against LBJ, who already had the people's vote with him as JFK's vice president, but at the same time, he had JFK's death in his back pocket at any time, ready to dispel any bad things about him. And really, the death of the commander-in-chief is one of the strongest symbols to the nation and a big motivator for voters. So on to the fourth unit, being the national government, the Congress, the presidency, bureaucracy, and the federal courts. For the fourth unit we learned about, I will keep this one more modern and focus on a very recent action taken by our own president, Mr. Barack Obama, and I speak of the Immigration Accountability Executive Action, or actions, depending on how you look at it. Most of all, you've heard of this, and some of the basic understanding is there, but just in case, President Barack Obama just recently announced a plan to allow millions of immigrants temporary citizenship within the United States, as well as indefinite reprieve from deportation. Now that's roughly 11 million undocumented persons in the States, and coming with citizenship and every benefit that comes with citizenship, ranging from employment to healthcare, and you see how that really got some people mad, to say the least. So, yeah, Republicans already hated the guy. Now he's pretty much stretching every constitutional bound he can find to get this thing passed. And so it's really not grinding well with the Republicans. But before we take any judgment, let's hear what the man has to say. If you listen closely, you could hear some key words that sounded just like something we heard in a video maybe a minute or two ago. JFK. Sorry. You hear a nation of immigrants and all these other terms that relate to the Civil Rights Act that you can really relate to JFK. Is Mr. Obama pulling out a JFK card on us? I'd like to think so, and let's see why that's so effective. Well, for starters, there really are a lot of arguments against Barack Obama's plan, and whether or not he has the constitutional authority and the authority as a representative of the state to do any of those things. So, does he have the power to give temporary administrative relief to undocumented immigrants without granting permanent status or any identity to those people? Well, there's a lot of people that say yes, and more specifically, the National Immigration Law Center says yes. The president not only has the power to make such laws, but where and how to enforce them. That's an official quote from the site themselves. All agencies of law enforcement have something called prosecutorial discretion. It's a big word. And the Department of Homeland Security also has the authority to prioritize its research to reach any stated goal. That's written anywhere. It could say, I use this money to this goal, therefore it's legitimate. These two powers, translated to the president as they can be, give him a pretty wide berth of what he can do, and even further than that, he has legislative backfires that he can take in case there's too much opposition, like the veto. So, well, let's see, now that we know support for it, let's see how Congress can actually stop him and on what legal grounds they can do that. So, one, let's not forget that Congress does set the budget for the government, and many times not getting their way means not getting a budget and the government shuts down and all that stuff like that. So, also, the words. A little exquisite wording, like in the 2014 budget for December, the none of the funds was mentioned 460 times throughout the document. with that very exquisite wording, you can deny fully, in clear language, things that are going through. Also, 2, a wide majority can override anything in Congress. If Congress was fully united on anything, it would go nowhere. But sadly, as we all know, that is a rather rare occurrence in Congress. So, yeah. 3, it is commonplace to see a wide array of restrictions on documents and laws placed by Congress. It's just normal. It's part of the negotiation process, actually, like, say, for the current budget. Congress placed massive restrictions on the allowance to Homeland Security. As you guys may have heard of, it's become a big issue. And how much they can get and how much is enough came up a lot and threatened the budget's completion altogether. So seeing these possibilities, you see how both sides have tools at the ready and is just kind of a waiting game for either, waiting for one to make the wrong step of the plan. So that is why the policy, and Mr. Obama's, by policy I mean Mr. Obama's executive action, is such a good thing for Unit 4 to be analyzed under. Because it's constantly, the system's constantly moving back and forth, and all the government institutions checking one another. One institution's going after this goal using this power, and the other one's coming all back again under it to get another power. And you can really see that through this document, you see them furthering their goals, as well as trying to back it with some legislative idea of why they can. So this executive order shows how the executive has evolved and into probably the most powerful branch, if I had to say so. In the planning of the Constitution, the focus was on actually a weak executive, and in the wording, instead of giving powers, they decided to strictly forbid acts by the president. Through wars and other events calling for a more strict and powerful executive, say the Great Depression and other such events that are minor economic depressions, that they need a central executive, they have allowed powers that still persist to this day, and therefore the president, as a member of the, government itself, has become a very, very powerful person with a lot of powers. So the 5th one that we did is civil rights and liberties. This unit was focused around the policy of choice for me being the Emancipation Proclamation, because believe it or not, when Abraham Lincoln emancipated the slaves, he actually created the first group of illegal immigrants in the country, recognized by the document. Think about it. The proclamation only made slavery illegal in the Confederacy, in the southern states that seceded. Therefore, you have a group of people in an area still in war without documentation that they are citizens in any way, because before this Emancipation Proclamation, technically they were property by court case and by law. And so therefore, they have no legal means of citizenship or any way of legally showing that I belong to this country, with the option of being deported at any time because of lack of any documentation. That's crazy, I know. But for the period of time between the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, every freed slave was a person of American soil lacking any history of noted documentation or legal citizenship in the states. Granted, many that made it north did in fact go through the process of becoming a citizen, and therefore most people that were in the border territories do not apply to this rule, but those that remained in the South, which is actually a large number of them, were technically between the time of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, illegal immigrants. So, in conclusion, the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation, intentionally or unintentionally, doesn't really matter for this purpose, ended up recognizing the existence of a group of illegal persons present in the nation, and then, by connection, granting that group inclusionary rights via the Constitution. It's awesome and fits perfectly and really interesting to think about if you haven't thought about that before. So, in conclusion of all this video that you've heard, I really like to thank you for viewing it, and I hope that now you've started to look at immigration as a general policy issue with deep historical roots and constantly evolving ideas. Even to this day, the idea of who's an immigrant and how can they immigrate and naturalization is a debated topic in Congress constantly. And therefore, still to this day, there are ideas of what constitute each, and as American society forms, so we'll really see in the future what immigration becomes, or if immigration itself is just an idea that fades away.